The Speedy World. I'm Syed Shabahat Ali, and you're watching Fault Lines. The vicious, draconian, and fascist regime of Narendra Modi does not leave any stone unturned to torture the Muslims of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This has been happening particularly since August 2019, when Article 370 and 35A of Indian Constitution were abrogated, and after which the Muslims were deprived of very limited constitutional rights that they were given unpromised under the Indian Constitution. While these rights were never sufficient according to the needs of the Muslims of Indian-occupied Kashmir. But yet what has followed this suit ever since 2019's August has distressed the Muslims across the world. The recent attempt has been release of a redrawn electoral constituency in Indian-occupied Kashmir, which means more democratic empowerment or more electoral empowerment for the Hindu majority areas and lesser in comparison for the Muslim majority areas. Pakistan has taken a stern notice of the situation. The charge d'affaires of Indian Embassy was summoned in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pakistan has lodged a formal protest in this regard. Also, the fact that all of this is in continuation of what is happening against the minorities in general and Muslims in particular in India under the vicious, draconian and fascist regime of Narendra Modi. Also, an important development that we'll be discussing in today's program is about Hurriyat leader Yasin Malik, a famous political figurehead of the Muslims of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, is being charged now formally with the charges of terrorism and illegal fundraising for banned outfits, which in simple words might mean a life imprisonment or a death penalty. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
The peace of South Asia has long been held hostage owing to Indian hegemonic designs which dangerously imperil regional peace. Indian malicious designs to alter the religious and demographic composition of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are vividly clear. Exhibiting its imperial designs, the Jammu and Kashmir Delimitation Commission added 6 new assembly seats for the Jammu region and 1 for Kashmir in its infamous Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir Delimitation Commission report. Pakistan already conveyed to Indian side that this entire exercise was farcical and had already been rejected by the cross-section of political parties in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Organization of Islamic Cooperation has strongly condemned the Indian government's recent delimitation of electoral constituency in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, terming it as a violation of OIC and United Nations Security Council resolutions. Narendra Modi's government broke up Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into 2 federal territories in 2019 as a part of a move to tighten its grip over the disputed region. Under the garb of so-called delimitation, the representation of Muslims in the redesignated constituencies had been reduced to their disadvantage. Pakistan, as a torchbearer of peace, always accorded due importance to diplomacy, and Foreign Office noted that doors for diplomacy on outstanding disputes with India remain open, and Pakistan seeks peaceful settlement of disputes with India.
My first guest in today's program is Dr. Mubin Shah, Director Kashmir House, joining me from Turkey. He remained elected President of Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and Trade. Dr. Mubin Shah, I welcome you to the program.
Thank you.
And Dr. Mubin Shah, we are talking about this process of electoral re-engineering by the fascist regime of Narendra Modi. Help us to understand what would this actually mean for the people of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
See, personally, I am not for electoral politics in Kashmir because all our resistance leadership has rejected this thing. Yes, the problem will be basically that it is a form of settler colonialism by which this, because they will create people who will then pass laws which will be detrimental to the majority community in Kashmir. This is basically what is going to happen after these electoral, the things they have started to do in Kashmir.
Dr. Mubin Shah, after the demise of Sayyid Ali Gilani, now Yasin Malik is, the figurehead that Muslims look at. He's an important political figure. I understand you have excellent personal relationship with him as well. Now, these sentences that have been awarded against him, how disturbed you are, and how big of a political development do you think it is in the Indian occupied region of Jammu and Kashmir?
This type of thing, is going to be sort of an existential, sort of problem for Kashmiris, because you have to recall the murder of Shahid Gilani Sahab and Shahid Sahrai Sahab, and how both of them were, sort of made shaheeds, in the sense one was put in prison, house arrest for so long that he was not able to get necessary treatment, and Sahrai Sahab in prison was also under the same thing. And basically, the thing is that if you recall the statement of Malik Sahab during his, that if seeking freedom is crime, every Kashmiris will commit it again and again and then go on. The problem is today that Yasin Malik and others may same fate as unfortunately Pakistan day by day is getting into an unstable situation, giving India more leverage. And we are only having this thing that Kashmir is the only, besides the nuclear arms and CPC, where all the political parties have support, bipartisan support all over from all. So it is important that action is taken by the Pakistan government as well as others, so that this is stopped. Because we fear that they will give a death penalty, because the courts, particularly when it comes to Kashmir, is an extension of the executive in India.
But generally speaking, I mean, as we understand, he's a political figurehead, a person who has always believed in the political process and has remained to be the political voice of the people of Kashmir. Why they're so much afraid of his voice? I mean, why this one man is so significant that since 2014, Indian government, Indian polity has done whatever best they could do to detain him, to keep him behind the bars, and to keep him under oppression to this point when he has been today sentenced for the act which everyone understands he has never committed.
No, the thing is this thing that it is very important that he converted himself into a Gandhian type of policy, of non-violent means of fighting the Indian occupation. And actually people like us learned from him that, the way how to do it. And I had very, very close contacts with him after 2008, after the Amarnath Rao. And we know that how he was the basic person, one of the main persons out of the joint resistance leadership who was giving, the necessary inputs. And people, India is afraid because internationally, they are trying to make him as a terrorist, which he is not, certainly. And he left arms, and you see, this is where a country like America, which actually facilitated that, of leaving his arm, and because they promised him at a certain point of time that the way to fight India or to get what you want is only by non-violent means. And today they are not supporting him, and this is the basic another problem into the whole thing.
So would you agree with me if I say that all the effort is actually tailored around the fact that the leadership of the Muslims of Kashmir should not be there, and they should be diverse. There should not be any single leadership pointing them toward a specific direction, so that the Indian government can implement their vicious designs in the region?
Exactly, that is one thing, and also another thing that after 2019, they have stopped all dissent in Kashmir. There is not a single leader who can speak up. If there are leaders, they are not able to speak up because the moment they speak up, they are put behind bars and under draconian laws, which are, there is no bail, there is no bail for years together, and even habeas corpus, is not allowed in such cases. So, for example, I personally was also a sufferer of the same thing. They did a PSA, but it was only because of pressure from the United States Senate and all. I was released because of the fact that the Supreme Court did not give a decision, but it delayed the decision. This is the problem at this point of time in Kashmir. So that is why it is important. It is important for our biggest supporter, that is the Pakistan government, to do something different now, so that people like him do not face the gallows. And this is going to be the biggest setback to the Kashmir movement as such,
Thank you
because
very much,
India is
Doctor.
India is taking advantage of the situation.
Thank you, Dr. Mubin Shah Saab. We are running out of time. Thank you very much for your valuable inputs in today's program.
Thank
Ladies
you.
and gentlemen, this was Dr. Mubin Shah from Istanbul. Raised some very pertinent and important points. The first thing is that, as he said, the main effort is to deprive the Muslims of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir of their political leadership. The only representation, the only voice that they have to vent their concerns and to lead their concerns to the rest of the world. Another important thing is that he interlinked this with the martyrdom, with the shahadat of Sayyid Ali Gilani, who remained under house arrest for quite a long time. And now he believes if the same happens with Yasin Malik Sahab, may Allah protect him against the vicious designs of the Indian government, this will create a political vacuum in the valley of Jammu and Kashmir. Another important point that he made was that Sayyid Ali Gilani as well as Yasin Malik Sahab are the people who represent the peaceful mind, who believe in the politics of non-oppression, who are not the people who believe to sort out the issues with the battle of the gun. They rather opt for the ballot box, and their only concern have remained to become the representatives of the voice of the Muslims of this region. Now I am joined by Mr. Majid Hadri. He's a famous journalist from Kashmir. Majid, I welcome you to my program.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ji walaikum salam. Majid, tell us about this recent process of electoral system re-engineering in Indian occupied Kashmir.
Well, see, delimitation is a normal process. And firstly, let me clarify before your channel, because it's your national channel, that since the abrogation of Article 370, people have given a protest. We never have any protest against the abrogation of Article 370 or against the delimitation. So people have in fact welcomed both the steps, the abrogation of Article 370 and the delimitation exercise which was pending. Now, why I'm saying so? I am a journalist and I go by facts and figures. There is not even one incident wherever in Kashmir in the last 2.5 years there has been a protest against the abrogation or against the recent 1 year of the delimitation exercise. This is just a kind of a phobia in some minds that something wrong is happening. The people are with it, the politicians are with it. So what is the need to discuss this? I'm afraid. Just why should we discuss this when the people are with it and the politicians of Kashmir are with it? Yes, over to you.
Well, there are certainly reasons behind it, because there are certain commitments from both the sides. Both the sides have committed to certain commitments, and these commitments have even gone to the level of United Nations. So unilaterally, India is not allowed to do so with the set of arrangements that we have between the two countries.
Well, see, you are dragging something which does not exist. The United Nations has never existed, I would say. It has never existed. The Palestine issue has been pending for so many years. They never did anything. They could not do even anything for the Ukraine issue. So let's forget that is something about the past which doesn't really mature in this real time life of what we are living in. So let's forget United Nations. It's a closed chapter. It's a gone chapter. I would say that time has come that we need to wind up this United Nations kind of an issue, because when it can't help Ukraine, it can't help Russia, it can't help other countries, it can't help Somalia, it can't help Yemen. So why should we discuss this? United Nations should discuss this.
So let
Let's talk something.
disputes between, but then the only other option is to settle the disputes with the barrel of the gun between the nations. That cannot settle the international conflicts in absence of a body that can do international arbitrations under certain rules and regulations.
See, we have had 4 wars on Kashmir. What has been the result? Nothing. War cannot help. If India and Pakistan have some issues beyond Kashmir, because Kashmir, as now, as what I see today, Kashmir is resolved. The people are with the abrogation. They have supported it. Now, if you two countries have some other issues beyond Kashmir, you better discuss that and resolve those issues so that we have peace and prosperity in the Asian subcontinent. Because the problem as of now is that you people have an issue. You have issue of demilitation. You are not looking about what is the internal crisis in your own country.
We certainly
I am sorry
understand
to say.
we certainly, Majid, understand the problems within our own country. It's not a platform to do the political point scoring against each other. The topic of today's program is Kashmir. If you want to have a discussion on Pakistan's internal issue, we can perhaps invite you to another program. Right now, what I'm trying to understand is that if United Nations commitment, the commitments made in United Nations are not to be fulfilled, what other platforms do we have to settle such international disputes where two countries, nuclearly armed, have fought wars with each other with full arms and ammunition? What other ways of settling disputes can these two countries have then?
Sir, there need to be bilateral talks between India and Pakistan over whichever issues are hampering any good relations between the two countries. These two countries are neighbors. They need to look for mutual coexistence. And that is the path of how we should have peace in the subcontinent. But yes, both the countries are nuclear armed. So we need to discuss very sensibly. As you said, war is the option. I say war is no option because you don't have a lesser this nuclear button for any power when you have this nuclear issues at stake. So the best thing is that if India and Pakistan want to grow with good relations, with good trade relations, with good bilateral relations, cultural exchange, etc., there is a need for talk between India and Pakistan, and that initiative has to come from Pakistan side because
Thank you
India
very
has
much.
already shown its.
Thank you, Majid. Thank you. We're short of time. Thank you very much for being guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Majid Hadri in my program, joining me from Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and he has a very different thought process. He believes that United Nations is a gone idea. United Nations should not be given any chance to resolve the international disputes, particularly a dispute like we have today in the valley of Jammu and Kashmir. But as he is, we understand that he has just ventilated whatever personal point of view he had. There are a number of independent writers from across the world who are not only protesting against this delimitation process, but are also concerned with these unilateral violations by the Indian side. And to add further into the subject, I am now joined by Lieutenant General retired Raza Khan, former president of National Defence University, Islamabad. General Raza Khan Saab, I welcome you to the program.
Thank you very much.
And so we are discussing the important developments happening in the valley of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now that time for electoral re-engineering have started, and this has triggered immense amount of concern in Pakistan. What are your thoughts on this, sir?
Okay, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. First of all, I think this Indian exercise of delimitation is an exercise in total futility because the people and the politicians of the illegally Indian occupied Kashmir have totally rejected it. Obviously, it is aimed at turning the majority of the Muslim Kashmiris into a minority. And then, of course, this is an attempt to change the demographic composition of Kashmir, which is not going to succeed. And only yesterday, if you had been watching, Mr. Karan Topper on the wire, and he was interviewing one of the former raw chief. I think he made it very clear that the situations since October of 2019 in Indian occupied Kashmir has deteriorated. It has deteriorated because it has alienated the entire Kashmiri population, and it is across the political divide. And I think they are determined to prevent, their lands, their properties being occupied by people from mainland India, and they are very well aware of the government's persuasion to let the Kashmiri Pandits go and settle in the valley, and because of their own insecurities, I think nobody is going in those areas, and I think all these efforts eventually will fail. Uh, and in particular, I think the fake trial of Mr. Yasin Malik, again, this is going to unite all Kashmiris, and that it is going to make Kashmir and India much more insecure. And this farce trial uh, of the compliant Indian judiciary, it is going to further damage the reputation of India. I think the earlier they understand it, the better it would be for them.
General Reza Sahab, this is not an isolated event. We just see, there are so many violations of human rights against all minorities in general, and Muslim being a minority in particular. This is just crossing all the limits, and we are still seeing a death silence by all the champions of human rights across the world. They just stay silent, they just allow India to do whatever India wants to do. So, do you think it is going to affect the very fabric of Indian polity that stands united only because of the democracy that they have?
Well, I think India is really not a democracy. It is a one-party autocracy, and constitutionally it is secular, but actually it is clearly a very fundamentalist, extremist, theocratic state, and this should be understood by India's friend, particularly the United States and others. And democracy there is just a veneer, a facade. And I think human rights in India now belong only to the Hindutva followers, no one else. And minorities have really very few rights, if at all. And you are absolutely right that all the minorities in India, particularly the over 200 million Muslims and the 210 million Dalits, the Sikhs, and the Christians, they are all being persecuted. And I think this is going to eventually endanger the cohesion of the Indian society. And I think it is not only the responsibility of the international humanitarian organizations, but also of the Indian people, the Indian politicians, the opposition, the Indian media, the saner elements, in India, all of them. But I think one of the big responsibilities is that of the Indian minorities. They have no other options but to unite, to regain, their own political space, so they can defeat, the present Hindutva following government there. And once they do that, probably, the situation of their human rights
Point well taken.
may ease
Point
off.
taken, Lieutenant General Raza Khan Sahab. I would request you to stay online. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break here as the first segment of the program comes to an end. And Lieutenant General Raza Khan Sahab will remain to be my guest with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and the second segment starts with the topic of Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan has become quite a complex issue in the politics or geopolitics of this region. Since United States has so far not opened the financial lifeline of the country, and ever since United States Army has left the country, the Central Bank of Afghanistan is still waiting for their own funds to be liquidated by the international financial system. This triggered by the largest drought and famine that Afghanistan had in its recent history, and also with the feeble structure of governance that Afghanistan has today, has increased the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, manifold for the poor nation. Meanwhile, the concerns have raised for Pakistan. Ever since Afghan Taliban have taken control of Afghanistan, attacks inside Pakistan have increased many times. Not only attacks on Pakistani civilian targets, but also the injuries and life losses of Pakistan military have increased phenomenally. And my guest, Lieutenant General retired Raza Khan, will speak on the subject. General Raza Khan Sahab, Pakistan is extremely concerned with the problems from across the border. Now, it's not only the civilian targets, it's also the injuries, the life losses of our armed forces have increased many times. What do you believe is the real problem behind all of this?
Okay, glad to be back with you again. Let me first state very clearly what is Pakistan's policy as it relates to Afghanistan. I think it is a desire to have a stable, united, prosperous, and friendly Afghanistan. And I think the same interests also hold good for Afghanistan to have, a secure, prosperous, and friendly Afghanistan. I think even for the United States, it is important that Afghanistan remains stable and friendly not only to the United States but also to the friends of the United States. But obviously, this cannot happen if the Afghanistan's economy does not grow, or if it continues to stay in the present predicament. And I think the earlier the United States and some European countries like Germany releases the frozen funds of the Afghan government, the earlier, the better it would be. Because unless the Afghan government is able to pay its security forces, it will not be able to control, terrorists, whether they belong to ISIS, Al Qaeda, the PLA, RAW, or others. So I think this is important. But I think whatever resources the present Afghan government has, they have to make sure that terrorism does not emanate from within their country to endanger their immediate neighbors, particularly Pakistan, which has done so much for Afghanistan and is continuing to do so. And there could be two reasons for that. Uh, One is, the lack of their capacity to secure the area near the Pak-Afghan border. Well, that is understandable. But there also appears uh, not enough, not enough political will to prevent the misuse of their territory by TPP and its supporters. That I think is inexcusable. And I think that is the promise which they had made to Pakistan and all its neighbors. And I think they must fulfill that promise under all circumstances because it is also in their interest that they do so.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant General retired Raza Khan Sahab, former president of National Defence University Islamabad, for being guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Lieutenant General retired Raza Khan Sahab, former president of National Defence University. Made some very pertinent points. He believes that there is a lack of political will as well as lack of capacity for the government in Afghanistan that is now in charge for this country and has to steer Afghanistan out of the political and economic quagmire that the country is facing at the moment. My next guest in today's program is Syed Muhammad Ali. He is international affairs expert, a frequently coming guest on my show, always enriches us with his brilliant ideas and brilliant feedback. Syed Muhammad Ali, I welcome you to the program.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to join you.
And we are discussing the problems that have increased for Pakistan ever since Taliban are in control. Fact remains, Pakistan has done phenomenal amount of work to bring Afghanistan out of its current political, economic, diplomatic crisis. We have spoken a lot about it in our previous programs, but yet the problems for Pakistan's military and the problem of terrorism in general has increased under the watch of Taliban's government in Afghanistan. What do you believe can be the reason for it?
Shawat, I think as I was listening to General Raza, and I agree with his assessment, but there are several reasons that need a wholesome analysis to better understand the contemporary situation of Afghanistan. And I think the inability or the unwillingness of the current regime to ensure the monopoly over violence is exclusively enjoyed by Kabul, and its territory is not used by any miscreants, not only against the interests of Afghan people, but also against its neighbors, particularly Pakistan. I think there are several reasons and factors that need a dispassionate analysis. First off is the social issue, and that is perhaps the most critical and oft neglected one, because the food crisis, the humanitarian crisis, is really critical and grave, and it is a huge irony, Shabahat, because the population of Afghanistan is almost identical to the population of another country at war right now, which is Ukraine. It is almost 40 million. But only last week, the commitment expressed by the Western leadership amounts to something like $40 billion. And here is a nation of almost identical size and population, which is being denied its own funds, its own sovereign funds to help them manage their health, their food security, and keep their life and limb intact. So that is the first aspect. And obviously Pakistani people and government have been trying our best, not just diplomatically, but also at a social level, in terms of philanthropy and supporting the Afghan people in this very critical juncture in their history by providing relief goods. The second aspect is economic, which I partly mentioned, because the economic relief from the international financial institutions, donor agencies, has not been forthcoming. So that makes it very difficult for Kabul government to, develop goodwill and win the trust of the Afghan people that they can actually contribute towards the progress and development of Afghan people. And their agenda is not just ideological or cultural, but also they have the capacity and the will to develop Afghanistan into a normal, stable, prosperous, vibrant nation. And third aspect is the security aspect, which is very critical because in terms of security, Shabahat, unfortunately, the government, despite its best efforts, has not been successful in ensuring that they enjoy an exclusive monopoly over violence over the entire territory of Afghanistan. And not just the Afghan territory has been used against Pakistan, but also against the Afghan government itself. So this means that Afghanistan remains a security contest in this region and a cause of concern for the neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan. The fourth aspect is diplomatic, which has offered some limited ray of hope. Pakistani state officials have been in touch with the Afghan government, but also Afghan government has facilitated a dialogue for some sort of temporary peace with the TTP, and there is a limited and temporary ceasefire which seems to be in place, but it remains to be seen whether this lasts beyond the month of May or not, because the history tells us that such treaties and agreements that have been signed with them, and most of the time they're rarely lived up to the commitments. So it is very important, and I remain very skeptical of its, although it's a temporary relief, but it remains to be seen because the Afghan government unfortunately has not shown the will or the capacity to eliminate these miscreants, and they have been also encouraging Pakistan to deal with miscreants diplomatically.
Ali, thank you very much for pointing out these four important elements. But one thing perhaps I believe has been missed out, and this is why I want to convert into a question, is the construction of the security fence. Now, this has become a bone of contention or a point of concern for many locals because their illicit economies, their black trade has been thriving on absence of a fence on the border, and Pakistan military has been working day and night to ensure that this gets respected as a border. It's not just crossed and violated from infinite places. So don't you believe that this is another reason why there will not be very positive sentiment on the other side of the border?
I think fencing is an important progress in terms of improving the border security of Pakistan, particularly against the miscreants from Afghanistan. And I think a significant part of that has been completed. But besides that, I think also till it is completed, there are areas which I think unfortunately the miscreants have been exploiting. But let me also relate it not just to TTP exclusively. The recent surge in terrorist attacks in Pakistan, including the one that happened in Karachi against the Chinese, and also the BLF and BLA related outfits, they have traditionally sought support, refuge, and security in Afghan soil. So that is something which remains a huge concern. And I think you would recall the strong statement issued by Pakistan's Foreign Office that, if Afghan soil is used against Pakistan's security interests, then I think Pakistan's patience should not be overestimated. And Pakistan remains committed to ensuring that territorial integrity and security and sovereignty, and it can take any measure to
Ali,
ensure
this
that
brings me to the last
not-
question of the program, which is very pertinent and very important. And I know of no other person who could be in a better position to respond to it. Now, tell me, we in one program, I remember almost a year ago, we were together and you were my guest in the studio, and we were talking about the role of the Indian consulates in sponsoring extremism, disposing of cash in the militants to make sure that there are attacks inside Pakistan, particularly attacks on security personnel in Balochistan and Waziristan. Now, since the previous regime has gone back, and Taliban are supposedly in control of most of the part of the country, how functional do you believe, that I'm asking for your personal opinion, would be the Indian agencies at the moment? Because the attacks recently on the Chinese professionals working in Karachi remind us of the days when Indian consulates were very active in sponsoring extremism inside Pakistan.
I think since the takeover of Afghan Taliban in August last year, the Indian consulate staff has left, and the Indian influence has significantly reduced from the Afghan soil. But the real reason why these attacks continue to take place is partly limited political will and limited capacity of the current government to ensure its sovereignty and security of its entire territory. Even, number of provinces like Badakhshan and others have witnessed attacks on Afghan Taliban themselves. So the problem is that Afghan Taliban enjoy control over large part of Afghanistan, but not all parts of Afghanistan. So there are pockets and areas which, the anti-state elements which are carrying out terrorist attacks against Pakistan continue to exploit from the Afghan soil. And that is why it is very important that despite our growing concerns, close diplomatic, security and intelligence cooperation between Islamabad and Kabul must continue to ensure there is no misperception, there is no gap in communication and information and intelligence sharing, to ensure that, like as earlier pointed out, because it is common interest of one nation and Pakistan that this region becomes stable, secure, and prosperous.
Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali, for being our guest in today's program.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Syed Muhammad Ali, expert of international relations. In the last part of his answer, his voice wasn't very clear, but he has pointed out, like always, some very important issues. And one of these important issues is that, in his point of view, which he very well qualified with a series of arguments, Afghan Taliban are not in control of entire Afghanistan at the moment. They do not have administrative muscle, administrative and economic capacity to run the entire country. And this is giving a chance of rise to many militant organizations, many militant factions within Afghanistan, who, in absence of a mainstream economy, would thrive on the business of militancy and terrorism. This should be a point of concern for the international community, as voiced by Pakistan times and again, as said by Pakistan in the extraordinary meeting of Organization of Islamic Countries. And if the situation is not dealt on merit, and if Afghanistan economy is not rehabilitated, I'm afraid the situation will continue to remain fragile in Afghanistan. We'll join you next week, once again, same time. And until then, Allah Hafiz.